It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Jerusalem. Our top story. Israel prepares to attack Gaza by air, land and sea. The country's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visits the front line to tell his forces the next stage is coming. But there are more questions over Israel's actions so far, with claims that 70 civilians were killed in a strike on a convoy fleeing the fighting. Questions too for Egypt, as foreign nationals were urged to head to its border crossing with Gaza. And in London, the Met Police says there were small pockets of disorder and 7 arrests as thousands marched to demand an end to the Gaza siege.
What happened last Saturday made me feel I was shocked, really shocked. But what I'm seeing now is just war crime from Israel.
Also ahead this evening, voters in all 6 Australian states reject plans to give indigenous people greater rights. In the sport, it's heartbreak for both Ireland and Wales as they crash out of the Rugby World Cup at the quarter-final stage. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30.
Hello and good evening from Jerusalem, where tonight there is increasing anticipation that Israeli forces are on the brink of a ground invasion of Gaza. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today visited some of the troops massing on the border of the territory and told them the next stage of the conflict was coming. Tonight, the Israeli Defence Forces provided more detail, suggesting the assault could come by air and sea as well as by land. Well, it's been a week now since Hamas unleashed terror in Israel. People living north of the Wadi Gaza River in Gaza have been told to move south ahead of an expected ground assault. That's a population of around 1.1 million people, many concentrated in Gaza City. Well, the main route from north to south consists of one main highway and bridge to the south of the enclave, the Salah al-Din Road, which runs from one end of the strip to the other. It is along this route that a convoy was reportedly attacked, killing around 70 people. Well, many are heading for the Rafah border crossing, the only route out of Gaza into Egypt, though it's unclear if they'll be allowed through. We'll have more on that later in the programme, but first Sky's Diana Magnay has this report on today's main developments. A warning that it includes images of the aftermath of the airstrike on the convoy.
The long walk south from Gaza City, clutching for most just a small bag. Israel promised safe passage to the million-plus Palestinians it has ordered to leave their homes in northern Gaza, the deadline expiring hours ago now. Few trusted that promise. Not after a direct hit on this truck on Friday afternoon, filled with people following Israel's evacuation order. The aftermath is far too bloody to show you. 70 people were killed here. There are the bodies of children sprawled across the truck. It's a scene of literal carnage. The injured rushed to Gaza's hospitals. Here, back into Gaza City, the Shifa hospital has seen emergency all week, and it does not stop. Children rushed in for urgent treatment. Others suddenly alone, lost in all the chaos. "I need Daddy," this little girl cries, but he's inside and strangers must step in. This is social media video from the same hospital. Watch the ambulance driver, just back from the scene, distraught at what he's witnessed. "Tell the people to go home," he says. "They bombed displaced people in trucks and in lorries. They bombed lorries and ambulances and everyone," another man adds. Israel says they do not target civilians. That's why they're asking them to leave Gaza City, they say. It's an active war zone and the next stage is coming. 35,000 people have taken shelter at Shifa Hospital now. Why should they leave if they think they'll die either way? And how to move so many badly injured. There's not much for them further south. crowded quarters, hundreds of families here at a UN school in central Gaza with nothing but a bit of bedding for a lucky few. Some who left their homes, others who have no home left. Our house was bombed, this woman says. It was bombed along with the houses around us. We left without clothes and without anything. I want to return to my home. At the Rafah crossing from Gaza into Egypt, dual nationals gathered, hopeful that diplomatic efforts would offer them a way out. But for now, it's staying shut. Hamas says Israel is tricking people into leaving. Israel says Hamas is using them as human shields. Stuck in the middle, civilians with no way out, waiting to see where the bombs fall next. Diana Magnay, Sky News.
Well, tonight, Benjamin Netanyahu has held a security cabinet briefing and spoken to world leaders, including Joe Biden. The IDF said it was preparing its forces for what it called an expanded arena of conflict. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is on the Israeli border with Gaza and looks now at what that could mean.
Israel's war is about to widen, marking their weapons. The next stage could be a combination of air, sea and land strikes. There'll be an emphasis on what the military's describing as significant ground operations. Troops listen as a top commander tells them their country is watching, and from here they move forward.
Those who witness these difficult, unimaginable sights on Shabbat will also have the privilege of witnessing the great victory of the IDF and the State of Israel over Hamas.
Israeli forces are also mobilising in the north, where they've struck another enemy, Hezbollah, in next-door Lebanon. Last week's carnage erupted on this man's watch. Benjamin Netanyahu now meeting with soldiers in southern Israel. They tell him about the Hamas attack against communities here that triggered this war. Are you ready? He asks. This was one of the places the Prime Minister visited. The kibbutz of Kfar Aza is a hellscape. Israeli forces describe what happened here as a massacre. No rush to remove the killers.
Yes, here in the kibbutz. Yes.
We met one soldier who just found out a friend and her partner had been confirmed dead.
We traveled together, and she was a good friend. And let's go to your house. The worst news? I don't know. Just think about your friend who just gone, and you not see him again. Not have any words.
And obviously you're a soldier. I mean, you're part of the military response. Like, how does it make you want to have revenge?
I don't want revenge. I just want justice.
And if the order came, would you be ready to go into Gaza if you had to?
If I had to, I will go.
And you're not scared?
No.
You can see Gaza in the distance, about a mile away. It's from there that the Hamas militants came. They broke through fences like this one. You can see here the twisted metal as they tore through and then rampaged through the communities. There's a heavy Israeli military presence here now as they prepare for the next phase in their response. And as we were standing here, we could hear the distant sound of gunfire. Israel's war on Gaza has largely been fought from a distance for now. That's about to change. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Southern Israel.
Well, we will have more from Deborah later in the programme, but first, Egypt, Israel and the US have discussed allowing foreign and dual nationals to leave Gaza via the Rafah border crossing into Egypt. We'll be speaking to Martha Kellner at the White House shortly, but first of all, let's go to our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bakhir, who is in Cairo for us. And Yusra, aid is trying to get into Gaza from Egypt, and foreign nationals are trying to get out. So what is happening at the border?
It's a complete stalemate, Anna. The aid that was going in via Rafah stopped going in after 3 airstrikes hit the border gate area in a 24-hour window on Monday and Tuesday, and since then there hasn't been any movement. There is, though, a sense that they are trying to get aid through, and aid has been collected by the Egyptian authorities from countries all over the world. The UAE, Turkey, Jordan have all sent medical supplies that are in the airport in the Sinai region, but still haven't gotten through Rafah. We heard earlier that reports were circulating that Egypt is refusing to allow for the passage of American citizens through Rafah until a humanitarian corridor is established and Israel makes a vow to not strike the border gate. Until then, there will be no movement of people out or aid going in, and people have been massing at the border, hundreds of people at Rafah, dual nationals hoping to get out. But of course, compared to the number of people trapped in Gaza with no viable option whatsoever, including that gate, that number is very little. At least 2.2 million people trapped in Gaza, facing aerial bombardment for the last week from Israel, many of them sheltering in hospitals, people trapped, people, even when they are evacuating, as we saw in Diana's report, convoys being hit on the road to the south. The situation is desperate. People are waiting to see if there will be a deal between Egypt, Israel, and the US that will allow for foreign nationals to evacuate. But at the same time, here in Cairo, there's conflicting messages. The Turkish delegation here, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Turkey, said that Palestinians should not leave their land and that they believe that Palestine should be established as an independent state. And that has been the line from the Egyptian presidency. But again, that line does conflict with what is actually safe for people to be doing. And many of them do, at this moment, need to get out as soon as possible through the only border crossing that isn't controlled by Israel, and that is Rafah.
Well, Martha, the US State Department certainly says there are an estimated 500 US citizens or dual nationals in Gaza. Their release will be one of the priorities for the US government. But tonight, Joe Biden has been speaking to both the Israeli Prime Minister and to the Palestinian leader.
Yeah, President Biden currently in the White House, Anna, having a range of high-level conversations, as you'd expect. We're told he's just got off the phone with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We're told that he reinforced that the US stands squarely behind Israel and that he reiterated his warning against anyone in the area seeking to expand this conflict. But leading the US diplomatic effort in the region has been the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. He's been in the region for the best part of a week now, meeting with high-level individuals from 7 different countries, mostly the Gulf states. He met with the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia today. And Antony Blinken, the US, clearly have 3 key aims. Firstly, it's to lessen the horror and the bloodshed in Gaza, to encourage Israel to moderate the force it's using to fight Hamas, but also to encourage other countries in the region to use their leverage to try and secure these humanitarian corridors, these safe passageways for people to escape Gaza, both Palestinian citizens, but also, as you say, the estimated 500 to 600 US citizens still believed to be in Gaza. Secondly, and perhaps the key aim long-term, is to stop this conflict from mushrooming. Everyone recognises the potential that this has to escalate. Third and finally, and perhaps the immediate aim, is to secure the release of those US hostages. An unknown number of US hostages, possibly up to 17, remain still in Gaza. And President Biden, on the morning shows on US TV this morning, promising to fight like hell, in his words, to bring them home.
Martha, live there at the White House. Thank you. Sky News has spoken to a British-Israeli soldier who was one of the first members of the military to engage with Hamas in last Saturday's attack. We're not fully identifying him because of concerns about his family's safety. He was speaking to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle.
We're getting calls over the radio that they are identifying hundreds upon hundreds of terrorists running and breaching the border, breaking down the fence and coming towards Israel. We drive towards where we were given the report, And as we turned the corner, they opened fire on us. I told my driver to hit the gas, and we tried to bypass them.
As Hamas fighters poured across the Gaza border last Saturday morning, Yoav, a young British Jew who came to Israel to serve his country, was one of the first soldiers to come into contact with them.
As we're driving forward, we lose control of our vehicle as an RPG hits the front of our vehicle, which caused us to crash. And we can see from behind us that they're running into the kibbutz. And then we get hit by another RPG, which caused my driver to get injured. It ripped off half of his arm and half of his leg. And I called over the radio to one of the other company commanders and I explained to him the situation.
Yoav was also injured. Shrapnel from a grenade or an RPG, he can't remember which, hit his forehead. A bullet lodged itself in the side of his neck.
I remember just constantly touching, waiting for the blood to explode out the side, and that never happened.
By now, it was only 7 a.m. With one driver seriously injured and a dead radio operator, they headed back to their base. The fight, though, was just beginning.
As we're driving to the base, we're continuing to be hit by live fire, and we break through the gates of the base and we drive inside, and we see a sight of total anarchy. Vehicles in flames and soldiers scattered around. We do our best to centralize all the injured people and bring the paramedics, the whole medical team, to start treating them. And all the meantime, we're doing our best to take back the base as much as we could. But we were a very small force, so we were quite limited with our options.
Around 6 p.m. on Saturday evening, Yoav was finally airlifted to hospital, almost 12 hours after the battle had begun.
Can you rejoin? Do you want to rejoin whilst this war's going on? Do you need time to recover?
I want to rejoin. All my soldiers are still there. I need a bit longer to recover, but hopefully in the next week or two, I'll be strong enough and able enough to be able to go back and join them. And so it's important for me to get back to them as soon as I can.
Well, back in the UK, thousands took to the streets today to show their solidarity with the Palestinian cause. More than 1,000 police officers were deployed in London, with marchers warned they faced arrest if they showed support for Hamas. In the event, police say there were just 7 arrests following what they called small pockets of disorder, as Adele Robinson reports.
As distant struggles become shared sorrows. Ripples from the Israel-Hamas conflict feeling closer than ever in the largest protest since last weekend's atrocities.
We are all Palestinians!
Thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters marched to Whitehall in London, all we spoke to wanting the same thing, an immediate ceasefire. Katie's Jewish. She's travelled from Hastings to be here.
Palestinians have been screaming for decades about this and no one was listening. And in our silence, they experience violence on a daily basis. I'm speechless.
Naramein says people in Gaza shouldn't be punished.
It's appalling. What happened last Saturday makes me feel I was shocked, really shocked. But what I'm seeing now is just war crime from Israel.
1, 2, 3, 4!
In other UK cities, protesters also made their voices heard. A police presence in each. And in London, 1,000 extra officers on the streets.
The language used around this conflict is so important, and the police have been extremely careful in their wording, describing themselves as independent and impartial as a service. However, they've also warned that anyone showing any support to any terrorist organisations will be arrested.
While mostly a peaceful protest, there were pockets of unrest. And some disagreements in the crowds, where Sky News witnessed a man appearing to hold a Hamas flag. Some also chanted this. the contentious slogan condemned by the Home Secretary. On stage at the end, there were calls for the UK government to intervene.
Very bluntly to our political leaders in this country, do not condone war crimes.
The Labour Party, however, is now advising its MPs not to attend any upcoming protests.
Free Palestine!
Then there were cheers for the Palestinian ambassador who thanked protesters.
Even now, when we feel isolated, abandoned, that so many of you are prepared to come out in support of Palestine, of justice, in support of law, in support of what is right, in support of peace.
With more protests planned, there's momentum on both sides.
All of Gazans are humans like you!
A conflict continuing to resonate far beyond its original borders. Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, more from here later in Sky News at 10 with an update on tonight's developments. But for now, let's head back to Jonathan.
Anna, many thanks. To Australia now, where voters have rejected a proposal to recognise Indigenous people in the country's constitution. A referendum was held in an attempt to give them a greater voice. There are concerns that the outcome of the votes, which was mirrored in each of Australia's 6 states, could impact community relations and the country's international standing. Nicole Johnston reports from Sydney.
A vote to unite the country and begin to heal years of trauma for Indigenous Australians has ended in failure. Bitter and divisive, this referendum to recognise First Nations people in the Constitution and give them a direct voice to government received a resounding no.
While tonight's result is not one that I had hoped for, I absolutely respect the decision of the Australian people and the democratic process that has delivered it, just as the Uluru Statement from the Heart was an invitation extended with humility, grace and optimism for the future. Tonight we must meet this result with the same grace and humility.
A debate polarised and politicised.
Information about voting yes.
The Yes campaign failed to inspire many voters, while the No camp demanded more detail.
It's causing division in the country.
Really worried about what tomorrow's going to bring.
Don't have enough information on what exactly the outcome will be after if the yes come through.
Fear and misinformation blamed for the defeat.
From the bottom of our hearts, thank you.
Do you blame racism at all for this result?
We live and breathe racism every day, Michael. But hope and goodwill ship has sailed. You may never pass this way.
This will be a hard blow for many Indigenous Australians. And the fear is that not only has it created a deep divide in the country, it could set the rights of Indigenous people back years. Neglect, poverty and racism. It was hoped this referendum would help these remote communities. There's no hope for that now. Nicole Johnston, Sky News, Sydney.
Christopher Luxon is to become New Zealand's new Prime Minister. His centre-right National Party won the country's general election. It will likely form a coalition government after getting 40% of the vote, while the outgoing Labour Party only managed 26% of the vote, 9 months after the resignation of previous Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And millions of people across the Americas have been treated to a rare ring of fire solar eclipse. It's when the moon doesn't completely cover the sun, but instead only partially obscures it. Depending on where it's being viewed, the ring of fire portion lasts from 3 to 5 minutes. Stunning. Time now for the sport with Alison.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
This house behind us is going to be about 8 weeks away from being done, but we're going to be showing you this one today. This one's all done, ready to go, just needs furnishing.
Perfect. Yeah, that's good. They even want to dirty the floor. Let me take my shoes off.
In the last 12 months, he's been at 3 different clubs in 2 different countries. Callum Hudson-Odoi is still only 22. Now he's desperate for Nottingham to be his new substantive home.
This is the master, you said, the master bedroom.
Yeah. You've got a couple of options. Upstairs has got some good rooms as well.
Yeah.
Plenty of room.
It's needed for trainers.
How many trainers have you got?
How many have I got? I think we've got, I don't even know.
Are we talking hundreds?
I think hundreds. Am I in the hundreds?
Can you extend the
I might need more.
For him? We'll knock through to another room.
I think there's another bit here. There's another bit you can actually survive. Yeah. You know.
Shoes in here, then.
Just shoes. I just need shoes in here.
Nottingham Forest made a record 6 signings on transfer deadline day. Snapping up Hudson-Odoi for just £5 million was a standout deal, especially when you consider that Bayern Munich offered in excess of £40 million for him just 3 years ago.
What was that day like? It was pretty surreal, wasn't it?
I've never been in a situation where it's just transfer deadline day. Like, you're thinking to yourself, is it going to happen? Is it not? We're at the Forest ground. Like, I'm seeing all the fans here expecting me fully to be done and everything. And I was just so buzzing to when they got over the line. I was just like, yeah, I'm here now. Delighted to be here. Everybody's around and I see you guys and I was like, all right, this is perfect.
Steve Cooper, how important was he in the decision?
Major.
He rang you up, didn't he?
Yeah, he rang me. He rang me a couple of times, to be fair. He's a very, very good guy, very good manager. And I said, hopefully he gets the fully best out of me.
Cooper was England under-17s manager in 2019 when Hudson-Odoi played in every game to help the Young Lions lift the World Cup.
Do you know what? I'll be honest. He was speaking to me a lot about the under-17s World Cup. And he was just like,
remember that?
Remember that
We
period
can do it
of
again.
time where you was playing every game for me and then like you was playing well, you was getting assists, goals and everything. And that was the best version of you. Like, I know you from that and I know how you play from there. So when I'm seeing you, I know the player that you can be and who you are. So for me, that was just the key factor of me being like, you know what? I believe in him and I trust him. For me, it's like, you want to be getting goals and you want to be getting assists and you want to be helping the team as much as possible because in the position that you're playing in, that's your job. You want to be scoring, creating, assisting. So for myself, I was like, you know what? I need to start scoring more. Like, my mentality this year has changed completely. I think like more of the years before, I was more thinking about, okay, playing nice and being safe and doing all the other stuff. And I was like, you know what? This year, my mentality has to be help the team, score more goals, score more, get more assists, be more of a problem that you was before.
Do you feel you're starting to learn your way around Nottingham a little bit now then?
Yeah, I think I know where I'm going now, you know. I think like even from the training ground home, I know my way off by heart now, so I think it's all good. I'm enjoying it, it's nice. The roads are quiet, this is what's the main thing.
What, compared with London?
Yeah, there's no traffic. London, anywhere you go, you know you're gonna be...
Well, the roads around Cobham are an absolute nightmare, aren't they?
They're the worst. I swear they're the worst.
You've been at Chelsea since the age of 6. You must have such a special affinity with that football.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Well, tonight Joe Biden has reiterated America's unwavering support for Israel as it prepares for its ground offensive amid a developing humanitarian crisis in Gaza itself. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes joins me now from Ashkelon in the south of Israel near the Gaza border. And Deborah, more outgoing rockets from Gaza this evening and the Israeli government holding that security assessment earlier tonight. Is the next phase getting nearer?
Yes, we are really moving into ever deeper into unprecedented and even more dangerous territory. Israel says it's preparing for what it's calling major ground operations. It'll know that that sort of move is going to have repercussions. Of course, the immediate focus is Hamas in Gaza, but Israeli forces are mobilizing around the country. There are tensions in the West Bank. There are tensions with Hezbollah across the border in Lebanon. These repercussions are obviously a known risk, but when Israeli commanders speak, you can see the pain on their faces from the atrocities that were inflicted on this country by Hamas a week ago, and they believe that they have no choice. What Israel will be hoping, though, is that its military strength and the backing of allies like the United States will mean that they'll be able to absorb the aftershocks of the actions from this war that will doubtless reverberate not just across the region, but across the world.
Deborah, live there in southern Israel. Thank you. So for now, we wait. The tanks and artillery have massed on the border with Gaza. Tens of thousands of Gazan citizens have already fled south. More remain in their homes, fearing that nowhere is safe in the territory. Hospitals in Gaza can no longer cope, and the Israeli Prime Minister told his forces today that the next phase is coming. Our coverage, of course, Jonathan, continues.
Anna in Jerusalem, many thanks for now. And that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, as always, we're going to take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview, including this story. It's on the front of the Sunday Mirror. The headline, very simple, Escape to Hell. And tonight I'll be joined by the journalist and author Christina Patterson, and also barrister and futurist Andrew Eborn. We'll be right back in a couple of minutes.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling?
I am angry.
It is an anti-woman agenda.
2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir? Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
You're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
You're with Sky News. In just a moment, we've got the press preview for you. It's our first look at what is on the front of Sunday's papers. But first, our main developments in the war between Israel and Hamas. The Israeli military says its forces are preparing to implement a wide range of offensive plans, including combined and coordinated strikes from the air, sea and land. Today, the Israeli Prime Minister visited troops on the border and told them to get ready for the next stage. His national security advisor also said Israel had failed to prevent last week's attack. An Israeli military spokesperson says the bodies of some abducted Israelis have been found at the edges of the Gaza Strip. And the number of Palestinians killed now stands at 2,269. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. This doesn't include the estimated 1,500 Hamas militants killed during the fighting. 1,300 Israelis have been killed. So time then for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on Sunday's front pages. And tonight we'll be checking out the headlines with our two guests in the studio. Let's take a look at some of those front pages first. Escape to Hell, that headline from the Daily Mirror, as it details the situation in Gaza. The Observer looks at Israel's warning to those fleeing Gaza as they say the next stage is coming. Let's bring in your Sunday Telegraph, also leading with Israel's ground operation in Gaza, as in fact is the Sunday Times. Meanwhile, the Sunday Express headlines the Prime Minister's words, "We stand by Israel always," and reports on the formal Labour leader joining thousands in supporting Palestinians in today's march, former Labour leader. The Mail on Sunday focuses on today's London march, picturing two women parading with pictures of paragliders used by Hamas. Well, don't forget, you can scan the QR code that you see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discuss them. And tonight we're joined by author and journalist Christina Patterson and barrister and futurist Andrew Eborn. Good to see you both this evening. I mean, what a stack of front pages. Misery piled on misery, Christina. And as the Observer shows there, both sides of this conflict, a horrific picture of a child being carried into hospital after an Israeli air raid in Gaza. And then next to it, an article with an interview of a teenager whose parents were killed by Hamas this time last week.
I mean, I have to say, Jonathan, in my many years of talking about the newspapers on Sky News, this has to be one of the darkest days. And it's very hard to know how to talk about any of it. I think what the Observer's done here is wise and right to have two heartbreaking stories from both sides, because what this is, above all else, is a tragedy. For the Middle East, it's a tragedy for Jews, it's a tragedy for Jews around the world. What happened in Israel a week ago, there is never, ever, ever any excuse for the abominations and terrorist acts that Hamas committed. But what is unfolding in Gaza now, and quite possibly, well, also in the West Bank to some extent, and quite possibly more widely across the Middle East, is a tragedy. And of course, Israel has the right to defend itself. Of course, it wants to and needs to crush Hamas. I think the question will be at what price, for how many people? And what we are seeing in every news bulletin is the price on both sides for the people in Israel living in a state of absolute terror and trauma and grief, and for the youngsters who are now having to join up in order to defend Israel, many of whom are they are all risking their lives, and some of them are likely to lose their lives. And for every person in Gaza who now risks, again, losing their life, losing their children, losing their parents, those who are fleeing under instructions from Israel from the north to the south, those who have lost relatives, and as we know, some of those fleeing have been bombed as they are fleeing. And it is just an utter, utter, utter tragedy.
Tragedy is exactly the right word, Andrew, isn't it? What's been going through your mind over the last week, a week on since this attack?
Well, the real problem we have, and we were discussing this earlier, we try to report these things without fear or favour. And the reality is that we are scared, that we don't want to put a word wrong in terms of the face of abject horror. And I think what happens, they always say the first victim, if you like, the first casualty of any war is the truth. And what we've tried to do is get to the bottom of this, shed a bit more light and less heat on the subject. But Antony Blinken, he was saying, the US Secretary of State, who was visiting Saudi Arabia, he urged restraint. Because you've got on both sides, there are tragedies, there are civilians, there are people behind these headlines. And what tends to happen so often with these terrible tragedies is we get desensitised to the horror that's going on. And what happens, there's also been a lot of fake stories, sadly, where a lot of disinformation gets spread, and both sides will basically peddle that sort of misinformation. And I think you need to look at this, make sure we look at the horror that is going on, look at the human tragedy, and try to, as the US Secretary of State, urge some sort of restraint.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's bring in the front of the Sunday Express. Christina, how do you think the government here has handled this horror? Their headline, Prime Minister, "We stand by Israel always," a picture there of a Jewish father and his children heading to prayers.
I think Rishi Sunak has got it about right in that we absolutely do have to stand with Israel in the tragedy they have been through. And I know that many Jews in this country are feeling unsafe in a way that they have never felt before. What we saw last weekend was shades of the Holocaust, essentially. And many people now are feeling alone. Many Jews are feeling frightened, unsupported, and they are being subject to, some of them, to anti-Semitic abuse. And people get confused by the issue with Palestine and somehow think it's OK. I can't imagine how they think it's OK, but they think it's OK to attack Jews and hold individual Jewish people responsible for actions that Israel may take in a variety of contexts and may yet to take in this war. So I do think that Rishi Sunak has got it about right. But I think it is quite difficult to say when people make sort of statements about unconditional support. I think that does move into, or could potentially move into, difficult territory, because there is, at the moment, doubt. You know, some people, some aid agencies think that what's happening in Gaza is a breach of international law in relation to war, and there have been reports of white phosphorus being used, which would certainly be a breach of international law. So I think we can do and must stand with Israel at this time, but I do think that all politicians have to state very clearly, as Antony Blinken has done, that international law has to be respected at all times.
Andrew, let's move on to the front of the Mail on Sunday. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, there have been pro-Palestinian marches in central London today, a number of arrests, only about 6, I think. The Mail is saying there is hatred on Britain's streets. A picture here of 2 women with images of paragliders on their backs. How do you think, as a nation, we're dealing with this crisis?
Well, I think what's happening is it's polarising, isn't it? And I think the reality is that we have to recognise that not all Palestinians are obviously Hamas. I think, as they rightly say on the front page of the Mail, social media's nasty tribalism has transferred from screen to street, and it's personified by the full-throated rage of some protesters. I think having certain imagery put on your clothing, so on and so forth, is obviously deliberately inflammatory. Putting that then on the front pages is only going to increase those sort of tensions. It is abhorrent, and we shouldn't be doing that sort of side. But at the same time, what we try and do is, if there's any way of trying to get some sort of calm and restraint so that it doesn't increase the tension, which is why we're sort of, as we touched on this in the break, how are we going to address all these horrible headlines without inflaming the situation? So I think that, as they say, it's social media's nasty tribalism. It's being accentuated by some of these reports, and I would absolutely urge restraint at the same time of questioning everything. Because so often you're using the media. They say if you read the newspapers, you may be misinformed, and if you don't read them, you're ill-informed. I think that the danger is that sometimes you're looking and trying to perpetuate your own prejudices. And that's the difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah.
From both sides. And I think what we need to do is get more, as I say, more light and less heat.
Yeah, very interesting that you say that about social media. Looking at the front of the Mirror, it's another picture of someone carrying a child. so powerful, isn't it, as an image, Christina? Escape to Hell is the simple headline. If we think we've seen some pretty awful images in the last few days, I'm afraid we're going to see more to come.
Yes, I'm afraid we are. And we were talking earlier about how, obviously, we don't get to see the worst images, but the reporters who are at what is now a front line do see horrific things. And for us, those images are blurred out. But how you recover from seeing those images, let alone when you are related to the people who have been wounded or killed, I don't know. I think the fear always, and this has happened to some extent with the war in Ukraine already, is that we do get desensitised. The more we become exposed to these images and reports, the more normal they seem. And, of course, none of it is normal. And I think, in a way, maybe we should ration our consumption of this, which is not to say that we don't engage with it. I think we absolutely should engage with it. I think it's our moral responsibility to be aware of what's happening in the world. And even though we feel helpless, most of us, it's not good enough to kind of pull up the drawbridge and pretend it's not happening. But I do also think there is a fine line between engaging with it and, almost a kind of war porn. I think you can become sort of, I can't imagine how, but I think people do get sort of hooked on the rolling news out of almost a kind of thrill is not the right word, but, all war reports
you can become addicted, can't you, to knowing what's happening and needing to know the very next thing, when actually sometimes it's better just to and I shouldn't be saying this as someone who works in television news, but sometimes it's better just to switch off.
I think it is.
And take a pause.
And I think it's also important, as we say, you're personifying the tragedy, because so often we do get anaesthetised, if you like, if you're inundated with imagery and so on and so forth. And I think this is why the Sunday Mirror's front page is so powerful, because you've got that image. It just brings it all home. And I think that's the sort of reality. And as I say, there are tragedies on both sides. There are people at the end of these stories, and that's what sometimes people forget.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, thank you both for the moment. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll carry on looking at tomorrow's front pages, including this story. It's on the front of the Sunday Times, the student who hid his Star of David because he didn't want to be a target. Talking about that and more when we come back.
I very fortunately got through the cancer treatment, got rid of the invader with a double mastectomy, prevented further reoccurrence with ovary removal, and wanted to get on with life, return to being hot blonde, but hot flush was the...
You've worked on that line, haven't you? I can tell.
Yeah, it was... I just felt like I was regular feelings that I was going to self-combust. Nothing prepared me for such a sudden crash. I had exceptional anxiety, and my bone density very quickly went osteopenic, and all the vocabulary in my head just left my head. I was trying to finish. I wanted to get back into having fun, enjoying life, being a hot blonde. Yeah. But yeah, menopause had other ideas.
Yeah. So it's one of the impacts of cancer treatment. If you have, you're a young woman and you're having chemotherapy, often it will just switch off your ovaries immediately. And what's sort of shocking about this is obviously women are told that this is a potential side effect of their treatment. But at that moment of diagnosis, you're just thinking about your cancer, you're just thinking, I want to get on with the surgery or the chemotherapy, etc., that's necessary. And it's only then down the line that people start to experience some of the symptoms that Alice has talked about. But actually, they don't quite know what that was. what is this? Is it depression? Is it my cancer coming back? So it's a very confusing time. So Maggie's are places for people with cancer and their family and friends to come to for emotional support. But with regards to the menopause, often, because it's one of the late and long-term effects of cancer treatment, it's often at a point when people are finishing treatment that they're wanting to explore what it is that they're feeling. And a bit like why Alice found her way coming into Maggie's door is, am I depressed? Is this normal? What can I do to help myself? And there's a lot that women can do to help themselves when they're going through the menopause.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Hello again, welcome back. Part 2 of the press preview. Andrew and Christina are still with us. Let's turn our attention to the front of the Sunday Times, Andrew. Jonah Jason, 21 years old. He is studying geography at Manchester Metropolitan University.
Yeah, and this is the sad reality of this tragic story, is that people are scared. And what this is that the student hid his Star of David because he didn't want to be a target. And people are living in fear. And I think it's really, really important that we try and take the sting out of this sort of situation where people shouldn't be living in fear. I live in very close to Regent's Park, not far from Golders Green, and lots of people, some of the schools have even closed down because they're scared of repercussions or they're scared for their own safety. That has to be wrong. And I think what's happening is that the more we scream these headlines and the more people are peddling hate, if you like, on both sides, it gets very, very tricky. And I think what we need to do is try and, if it's possible, to realise that the atrocities are appalling. We need to work out that, as you said beforehand, not all Palestinians are Hamas. We need to work out that people need to respect on both sides in this sort of conversation.
Yeah, and so it's sad that this is happening on a university campus.
Yes,
you know, young people who you would hope would be the future.
And this is a really heartbreaking story. And in fact, earlier this week, David Baddiel was talking, who wrote a book about anti-Semitism, and he was talking about how, in response to that story about several Jewish schools initially advising their pupils not to wear their school blazers, which has Stars of David on them, and then some of them actually closing because of safety fears. He was saying that he also had a blazer as a child that had a Star of David, and that when he was researching a film about anti-Semitism, he had been interviewing a child in a school and talking about the safety procedures that all Jewish children go through at their schools. And the child did not realise that they were not standard in all schools in the UK. He didn't realise that what he was having to go through was not the norm. And I think, as you say, Jonathan, the fact that this is happening on a university is absolutely heartbreaking. How we can have reached a point where the people who are meant to be the most highly educated in our society can say the kind of things that are talked about in this article. This student, Jonah Jason, talked about the president of Manchester University's Palestine Society, who spoke at a rally saying that she was full of pride and full of joy at what had happened with Hamas in Israel last weekend. Look, I'm not someone who wants to stamp down on free speech, but anyone who is peddling hate speech in that way really should be held responsible for what they are saying. That is utterly irresponsible. And I suspect that part of what's happening, and Andrew hinted at it earlier, which is, social media amplification of untruths. I think probably a hefty dose of all of this is ignorance, that people just don't understand. I mean, nobody fully understands the situation in the Middle East because it is an incredibly complicated situation, and history is not just the history of the last 100 years, it's a history of, you know, more than a couple of millennia. But I think the fact that you can have undergraduates studying degrees in this country and saying that kind of thing really is very shocking. And I hope that that woman and anyone who makes statements like that, whether on marches or in university lecture theatres or anywhere else, is held to account for their words.
And you're right, it's freedom of speech, but not freedom from consequences. And I think realising that we should never, ever put people in fear and have debate and so on and so forth and have that on a sort of sensible thing. But if people are in fear and have to hide their identity or their religion because they're scared of the consequences, that has to be wrong.
Yeah. Andrew, talk me through this in the Sunday Express as well. Most people believe defence spending should be increased. We know Britain, of course, has sent some military assets, hasn't it, to the region?
Yeah, so they did a nationwide poll, and half the response, more than half, 55%, said the UK should increase defence spending to strengthen Britain's armed forces. And actually, it's not a surprising result. I think when you start having conflicts and it comes to these shores, it's not surprising that people are going to turn around and say, look, what we have to do is make sure we're protected. Realisation that the world is getting more dangerous. I think that's certainly the reality. So, as I say, it's not a surprise if you were to ask people, should we be spending more to make sure we're safe, then, of course, they're going to say yes.
Yeah, General Sir Richard Barron's, who led the Joint Force Command until 2016, saying the armed forces are just too small, but if it applies itself, Britain can create an effective 21st century armed force. OK, perhaps discuss that more in the next hour. Thank you both for the moment. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, the Israeli military says its forces are preparing to attack Gaza by land, sea and air. We'll have a full run-through of the front pages for you as well.